Good. Hello, everybody. This is Dave from VCRTV.com. This is kind of an unofficial Dave TV where I'm kind of going to look at some cool synth pop. I don't know. I've gotten a big synth pop mood lately, and so I decided to make this kind of boring weekend. Okay, there's some good NFL football on later today. It's Sunday the 22nd. But I decided to, it's a kind of a boring weekend in January. Kind of the weather stinks. It's cold. So I thought, what a great time to relive some cool synth pop from my 1980s days. Now in the 80s, I was, in my late 20s, early 30s. And, that was the time I'd always been a music fan, even since the 60s. When I was a kid in the 60s, I'd listened to WFIL in Philly and Wibbage. I was living in the Jersey suburbs, and that was my music back then. The Monkees, the Beatles, stuff like that. And then as I got into the 70s, it was kind of regular top 40, stuff like that. And then about the late 70s, I started to get into really what I thought was really cool progressive rockish, new wave-ish kind of stuff, like the Cars and the Cure and New Order. And then, of course, the 80s came around and those bands just flourished. And there's a lot of cool bands, and I'm not going to focus on the bands that use real instruments. There's a lot of cool bands like XTC and The Cure and REM and U2 that use real instruments, and they're great bands. What I'm going to focus on today is more of the synthy stuff, the synth pop stuff. Now MTV was born in the early 80s, and there's a lot of synth pop on MTV. That was the wave of the future for the 1980s. You listen to it today, and it sounds a little bit campy and a little, you see the big poop hair and all that. But I'm just going to reflect on some synth poppy stuff. Now, I'm posting a few videos on my Facebook page today, so you can check them out. I've got some Animotion, and I think I put a New Order one up there, and stuff like that. Just some cool Bell Stars. Remember them? So I went and dug out a few of these synth poppy things from my massive music collection. Of course, what we're listening to right here, this wasn't really synth pop. This was more like synth techno. But I always loved Severed Heads out of Australia. A guy I think named Tom Eller was behind this band, and they're really cool. And it's just bizarre, synthy stuff. It's very poppy. Believe me, it has a lot of hooks in it and everything like that, but it never got any airplay, maybe except on the old HFS for a little while. But it's just one of my all-time favorites. This was back in the 80s. What does this album come out from? It doesn't say. But this is somewhere in the 80s, but I always liked the Severed Heads. Getting into more traditional synthy pop, of course, we had New Order. This is one of my favorite New Order albums, Brotherhood. New Order, they were kind of on the cutting edge of it. Really that synth sound. Anybody remember Pete Shelley and his Homo Sapien? This was a really cool album. And it's, again, very synthy. Love in Vain, Yesterday's Not Here. Really, really cool stuff there. And then we've got the Cyphers. Again, sometimes wonder, did they use real instruments in this? Probably. But, very synthy stuff. I love this stuff. This goes back to some really cool memories I had of the old WLIR in New York, 92.7. I had to go up to New York City for a broadcasting convention. I think it was 1986 when the Mets were playing the Red Sox, something like that, for the World Series. And that same weekend, I think it was 86, maybe 87, I think it was 86. And I was up there, and I was just having a great time that weekend, listening to LIR, which was a effing cool radio station. No longer there, of course. You turn to 92.7 these days, I guess you get Spanish, right? But WLIR was one hell of a cool station. Flock of Seagulls. Again, you look at these guys, and you kind of laugh. The big poof hair and all that. But they really did some killer pop songs here. Iran, Space Age Love Song, Telecommunication, Nightmares, Wishing, If I Had a Photograph of You. Really, really, really cool pop stuff. One of the great synth pop maestros was Thomas Dolby. He did some really cool stuff. Remember She Blinded Me with Science. That was one of his big hits. But he did some other really cool stuff, like One of Our Submarines and Leipzig. Some really nice stuff. Another Kings of Synthpop were Erasure. Really nice stuff here. Ship of Fools, one of my favorite songs. Chains of Love. And probably one of the best synthpop bands ever was Depeche Mode. And this is one of my favorite Depeche Mode albums, Never Let Me Down Again. They were probably one of the most successful synthpop bands. Say that fast. Synthpop bands in America. Got a lot of play. And they especially got a lot of play out of KROQ, which is one of the really cool stations out there in LA, 106.7. A couple really cool synth-poppy, remember the Rock of the 80s format? Yeah, that was what WLIR was kind of doing in New York. We had IFI in Philly for a few months. You never really had a Rock of the 80s station in Washington, although HFS played a lot of that music. Devo, of course, really classic synth-pop there from Ohio. I Can't Get No Satisfaction, their remake of the old Stones tune. Fabulous stuff there. And of course, one of the first real true synth-poppy bands was the Cars, and they came along actually before everybody else in the 70s. It had some really cool big hits. A lot of rock stations weren't playing the Cars in the late 70s because they just didn't quite fit that kind of rock format. But a few stations went out of their way and played them, and then they kind of got into that rock of the 80s format. And now when you listen to rock stations, even mainstreamer stations like DC 101 and even 98 Rock, the Cars are just up there with Led Zeppelin and the Stones. They've really, mellowed, matured, but they're one of the great rock bands ever. And this was one of the first kind of synthy pop bands out there. And the funny thing is, a lot of the synth pop came from Britain. This was synth pop from America. A lot of musical trends started in America, went over to England, got real popular, and came back. Rock and roll did that. It started in America, went over to England, got real popular, and came back, and we looked at it as being kind of English. Peter Murphy and Bauhaus, again, really cool stuff. Talk about synth pop, you can't leave out Gary Newman and his Pleasure Principle. Really cool stuff. Again, this wasn't so much poppy as kind of techno, weird rock, but it was cool. Going on to the hard side of synth pop, 9 Inch Nails, of course. Never forget the great Pet Shop Boys. I mean, these guys were subversive, out there stuff, and some of the greatest pop tunes ever. They transcended a lot of, even the synth pop. Even though the music was basically synth pop, it's absolutely brilliant. And of course, we can't forget Missing Guitars, right? The Missing Persons, Destination Unknown, Words, Walking in LA, some really cool stuff there. And getting into the more trippy synthy pop. Again, this is back to the early 70s, Kraftwerk. So we're even predating the Cars here with some of Kraftwerk stuff. This isn't really pop, but it predates, it was the fodder for a lot of synth pop in the 80s. Kraftwerk actually came, a lot of their albums were like early 70s. Really trippy stuff here. And we can't forget the good old American Information Society. Some really cool stuff from them. Again, another WLIR staple. And one of my favorite synth-poppy bands was a band called New Music, M-U-S-I-K, which was actually not really a band, but just a guy, would have plugged into a bunch of computers. But this was Trevor Horn, who later went on to do the Buggles. And, of course, the first song ever played on MTV, Video Killed the Radio Star. There. All right, folks. Just wanted to give you a few nuggets from my synth pop collection here. Again, I like a lot of this progressive rock, and as I said, a lot of cool bands I left out. The Pretenders, U2, REM, basically because they're not really synth pop. Lots of stuff I like. The Cure, I don't really consider them synth pop. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe you could argue about that. But anyhow, that's my little synth pop weekend. It's a synth pop weekend. Now let's go watch the Ravens beat the Patriots and the Giants beat the San Francisco team, whatever the hell they're called. And enjoy this winter. And thanks for coming by DCRTV.com and checking out Dave's record collection. Although they're not any, although I do have some records here. So everybody Synthpop again. Clash again. Another band I like, but they're not Synthpop. Elvis Costello. Another guy I like. He's not Synthpop. Okay, here's some cool Synthpop. Left them out of my list. Soft Cell. Really good Synthpop there, huh? Anything else in here? Susie and the Banshees? I don't know if I call it Synthpop. Okay, here's a good one. Ultravox. Remember Ultravox? This was cool Synthpop. Stranglers. Japan. Okay, Japan. There's a great British band. Didn't get real popular over here, but some really good stuff there. All right, folks. Thanks for watching this special edition of Dave TV. Go out there and floof up my hair, puff it up, and get those air guitars going and crank up the synth. Have a good one. So, there.